Hopefully, I just fixed it.
Okay.
So I'm going to start from the beginning. Oh, it's still not on. That's all right. At least we're not spinning. It was spinning for chapel this morning.
It was.
The camera was kind of doing
Oh,
this. So at least we're not spinning.
Yeah. I don't know how I do it. It's spinning.
All righty.
Technical stuff.
Hmm?
Technical stuff.
Yeah.
If it was just a wheelbarrow or a hoe, I could do it.
Do you know Leo Judy?
No, I don't think so.
He lives in the first apartment here on the right,
Okay.
and his TV, he welcomes us actually, but has become our de facto monitor. So she went to go see if it's on in his apartment. And,
Okay.
yeah, it's funny. Leo lived over towards Lucan's Lake, but he and his wife were members at Liberty Mills Church of the Brethren for a well, I think he still is a member.
Okay.
But it's funny that he drove all that way, past a couple churches to get there. But you never know. I don't know what the family connections were or anything like that. But
He may have had some parents.
Unfortunately, it's not a screen I even know what I'm.
huh? Is it recording? Okay.
It appears to be, yes. It says it's recording. I see you on YouTube. Excellent connection. I'm so sorry. I say go. I'll continue working on it. If I get you on channel 3, I'll do it.
Should we go ahead and record, or what do you think we should do?
What do you want to do? I can't get Stevie to the phone right now, so I will record and we'll get it on YouTube and replay it as soon as I get it figured out.
Okay,
Thank you. Sorry, guys.
that's all right.
So it'll record, but it's not live.
Right, that's right.
Okay. Except for Jan.
Yeah, except for Jan. Well, we are having a few difficulties with technology still, and so I'm going to just start from the beginning. Welcome to the Timbercrest chat. I'm Brian Daniels, your director of program and services, and before I begin our conversation with Cliff, just a couple of quick announcements. The first is that due to the current state of restrictions, all of our group activities are suspended until September 28th. And so hopefully we'll make it through that date with no new positive tests and that sort of thing. And if we do that, things will go back to a form of normal after that. But there's no group activities, at least until then. But there are opportunities. One is coming up on Monday, where your Timberline mentions that this will take place in the chapel. But we have a fall prevention event on Monday, and this will be outdoors in the hub parking lot. We'll have a few spaces blocked off for parking, and set up some tables there. There'll be information about how to prevent falls. The therapists from HTS, our therapy company, our therapists will be there to help assess you for some risk for falls and to pass out information about how you can prevent falls in your own home. There will also be some refreshments, so you can come and learn about those types of things. September is Fall Prevention Month, and so we're hoping that this is one step towards that. The way we have it broken down, again, this is, please keep our the restrictions in mind, this is why we're doing this. If you live in the neighborhood homes, we'd like to encourage you to come to that event from 10 to 11:30 Monday morning. And if you live in the manor, we'd like to encourage you to come to that event from 2 to 3:30. So that's coming up on Monday. Also, even though we're not able to have snacks together in the snack shop on Wednesday, I really want to encourage you to please come on Wednesday to pick up, I think next week is Ice Cream Sundays, and come to the come to the snack shop. And even though we can't eat together, you can pick up a sundae and do that. We're not delivering those because part of the idea is, of course, that we want you to get out for a little bit and see other people and be involved with others. And that's about all the things that we have going on. You can see some other things happening on Channel 2, and please keep up with the announcements there as well. So, my guest today on the chat is Cliff Kindy. Cliff is no stranger to Timbercrest, and he has become a friend over the years, and I'm glad of that as well. So Cliff, before we start the actual interview, tell people who live here who may not know you a little bit about yourself.
My wife and I live at Joyfield Farm, about 4 miles from here. We are market gardeners, so we grow and sell produce, fruits and vegetables. I think a pertinent piece of information is that I've spent my last 30 years working with Christian peacemaker teams in places of conflict around the world. And so I have a book even, Resurrection Peacemaking, Plowsharing the Tools of War, that just is out about a year ago. So that's probably enough for people to know.
Sure. I did want to ask, I've always wanted to know, I know Fingerly's have produce year-round because of their setup. Do you do similar, or do you have produce year-round?
We've chosen to be seasonal so that we're free to do disaster work and my work with Christian peacemaker teams. So we try to make the season as short as it can be, without greenhouses, without those kinds of things. So we intentionally try to start late enough in the spring that, well, like Arlene was a month in North Carolina last March, and she'll be leaving middle of October to do something like that again, cooking for a disaster team. So,
fun.
So not going year-round means we're free to do some of the other things we enjoy doing as volunteers.
One of the reasons that I had asked you to come for today was the recent situation with the, I don't know what the right term is, the departure, what seems to be a sense of closing things up for American military involvement in Afghanistan. And to get your perspective, because I think most of us, at least here at Timbercrest, are fairly provincial when it comes to those things. We have concerns about that, but I've never been to the Middle East at all. So I thought you might share some perspective on what kinds of things from your point of view happen to create that situation, and then what's going to happen now. What are some things that are going to be going on?
Well, clearly the attack on the World Trade Center was a trigger for the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan. In fact, 19 years ago, I was preparing to go to Afghanistan because we were in Afghanistan at that point. And then instead of going to Afghanistan, we went to Iraq. Our team with Christian peacemaker teams went to Iraq instead of to Afghanistan. In Iraq, we were asking ourselves the question, what would it take to stop a war for a change? The one in Afghanistan was already going, and we were in Iraq 5 months before the U.S. invasion of Baghdad. So, do peacemakers have the tools to stop war? That's a pretty bold question.
Sure.
And at this point, I'd say we do. But it requires a lot of risk-taking and a lot of creativity and imagination. Now, Afghanistan, I mean, the United States would not have had to respond the way it did. We would have not have had to occupy Afghanistan. As occupiers of Afghanistan, we're responsible for the people who live there. And we haven't taken very good care of the people of Afghanistan. At this point, the poverty rate in Afghanistan is about 97%. I mean, and they're expecting that several million people will be facing starvation by winter, including about 1 million children.
Wow.
Now, if we had spent the money, we've spent over $1 trillion in Afghanistan, but most of it's military. And you know, one of the advantages of war is that weapons contractors and private contractors make lots of money. And so they're lobbying to keep the war going. They go forever. You can make lots of money on that. And they've done well. But it doesn't do anything for the people of Afghanistan. If those figures are accurate, we've pretty well destroyed the country. If we had spent $1 trillion on building up the country, education, housing, jobs, health care, I mean, $1 trillion goes a long way in a country like Afghanistan. So part of the question that I ask myself is, what are the tools that we can use in situations of conflict? And do the tools work?
Right.
You know, what did we want to do? What did the United States want to do going into Afghanistan? Did they want to defeat the Taliban? Well, we didn't. We lost. And so then you have to ask yourself the question, if military tools that were sold by the military suppliers in our country work, surely the most powerful nation in the world would have won a war, but we didn't. We lost the war. So those tools don't work, except for the companies, because they make money for them. It didn't do anything for our soldiers who come home with post-traumatic stress, who have to ask ourselves the question, well, what did I go in for if we were going to lose the war? And all the kinds of questions that tear people apart and lead to suicide and everything else. It didn't do anything for them. You know, did it put somebody in the history book for starting a war in Afghanistan? Did a president get acclaim for starting a war? I don't know. Those are some of the issues that I mull in my mind as we're at this point, pulling out and in a pretty difficult situation.
Yeah, I think, I don't remember who said that Afghanistan is the graveyard of Western armies, but the tools of military effort have been tried by the British and by the Soviets and now by us.
I think twice by the British, right?
And it's all come to naught. It ends up being entirely wasteful. And as you said, particularly damaging to the men and women of the villages and the valleys and the people who live there. So if the military tools don't work, in your way of thinking, what are some of the peacemaker tools that could have worked? or could
Well,
work?
One of the books that's been most influential in my life is A Man to Match His Mountains, Badshah Khan, Nonviolent Soldier of Islam. It tells about Badshah Khan, who was Pathan, so he would have been the same tribe as many of the Taliban. It was a warrior tribe, but Badshah Khan was attracted by Mahatma Gandhi and became his colleague for most of his life. He was nonviolence for him became the alternative to being a warrior. Or he was a warrior, but a nonviolent warrior. And he put together a 100,000 person nonviolent army. It was such a threat to the British Empire that they had more troops in just that north region of what's now the borderland between Pakistan and Afghanistan. The British had more troops in that region than all the rest of India, with the threat of Gandhi's nonviolent uprising. Now, what were the tools that Badshah Khan used? Well, he talked about cleanliness of the community and of the home. He said, we need to keep our homes clean so we can feel good about ourselves. Educating women. Women are an important part of our society, and if we are all educated, we are better able to deal with the issues that our society faces. And then boldness. He trained his nonviolent army to be able to go into the face of a gun without fear. I mean, those are some of the tools that I think are still important. You know, whether it's nonviolence, education is nonviolent. It's a good tool.
Sure, it is.
Maybe growing things, like I'm a gardener. If I can teach people how to grow gardens, we have interns most every summer who come to work at the farm. And if you can teach people how to grow food, there wouldn't be 1 million people starving to death in Afghanistan. If we have a good image of ourselves, we don't take it out on other people. If we feel okay about ourselves, we aren't attacking other people, trying to put them down, trying to tear them out. So those are important tools in nonviolence. I usually talk about boldness, and that's what he trained his nonviolent army to do. So that boldness, nonviolence isn't for the timid. Nonviolence takes some risk taking. Nonviolence doesn't mean you aren't going to be killed, you aren't going to die, you aren't going to be injured. But we have to be willing to take those risks for peacemaking.
Sure.
Maybe I'll stop there. You get some idea of what.
Yeah, I do. It reminds me of the old, the Quaker way of thinking of actually removing the causes of war by what you're saying, the sanitation and the education and those sorts of things. Remove the causes of war. And when you do that, there's no reason to have to go fight each other, and,
Yes.
and that's a good thing. I know that you said that you went to Iraq and weren't able to go to Afghanistan. Do you think? Well, my question, I guess, is rooted in the thought that some people see the Taliban, especially, as merciless aggressors. That there's no dealing with them. And so I guess the first part of the question is, do you believe that to be true, and from what you know of the cultures over there? And then the second would be, if they are indeed that way, how do we deal with a culture like that?
No, excellent questions. As far as I know, I've never met the Taliban. I think there were There were groups like that in Iraq. My teammates were kidnapped by a radical group in Iraq and held hostage for 118 days. I remember one time we had done a training, a nonviolent training for a Muslim peacemaker team. They said, would you train us to be peacemakers?
Wow.
Not Christian peacemakers because we're Muslim, but would you train us to be Muslim peacemaker team? And so we had done that. We had our team in Baghdad had gone down to Karbala to do that training. It was about a week-long training and a pretty difficult time. But we did that training. At the end of our training, our contact person, Muhammad, was saying, Cliff, remember there was this other group that wanted to meet with CPT. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And so we were checking with translators to speak. We wanted to make sure we were understanding things clearly as we were interacting with them. And it was representatives of Muqtada al-Sadr. He was the firebrand cleric who was very anti-American, very nationalist Iraqi, but very anti-American. And our translator said, no, wait, those people are off the wall. I'll never go with you. Well, we twisted arms because we needed a translator. And finally, one of the translators said, essentially, well, okay, I'll go die with you. So it was that kind of risk, but we felt it was important to meet with them. And it was two young men. One was a high school teacher, nicely dressed, high school teacher. The other was a veterinarian. And their question was, tell us about nonviolence. We have the tools of violence. We know how to use the tools of violence, but sometimes they don't work. Tell us about nonviolence. And that group, Muqtada al-Sadr's group, carried out some of the most dramatic nonviolent actions I've ever seen anywhere I've worked around the world. And I think that is an entry point for us to interact with people. And probably if the United States had allied itself with Muqtada al-Sadr instead of the clerics that had connections to Iran, there would have been a different story in Iraq, and we wouldn't be at the place we are now with Iran. I don't know if that would ever happen, but clearly that is a possibility.
Sure.
I mean, we could have chosen not to attack Afghanistan. The reports right now are that in the countryside, people are not being killed. The violence that was happening coming down from the air, the fighting on the ground, that was mostly the people that get killed in a war are the women and children. And that's what was happening in Afghanistan. Those were the victims. We haven't, until that bombing at the airport, there hadn't been U.S. troops killed in Afghanistan for some period. So it's the women and children that get killed. So how do we relate to those who are radically violent in our eyes? I think first we have to be willing to meet with them. And we might find out that we have more things in common than we assume. I think we have to give room for each other's differences. They have to recognize that we're Christian for the most part, and we have to recognize that they're Muslim for the most part. And those two religions are both pretty evangelical, and so there's a lot of conflict that builds up because of that. I talked about Badshah Khan, Nonviolent Soldier of Islam, A Man to Match His Mountains. We took that book into Gaza when CPT went into Gaza, made it available in Arabic, and then when we went into Iraq, we also took that book because I think it has a powerful story to tell, both for us and for the people of Gaza and the people of Iraq. Yeah, nonviolence. I'd like it to have an opportunity to try it, so.
No, I agree. It's always been a frustration when you have a position of peace where it's not usually seen as realistic. You know, when I brought the subject up with people, you know, the first thing they go for is the old, well, you mean if somebody had broken into your house and you know, had a gun and was threatening your wife and children, you wouldn't do anything to stop it? And it's what I certainly would, but not, hopefully, nothing violent that would stop it. But, you know, and I think sometimes even in international situations, that's the attitude. Well, you know, that might work, but we'll make a lot more money, like you said, paying the weapons manufacturers and that sort of thing. It's a sad situation. We do have right in this area, there is a connection to the tragedy in Afghanistan when this young man from Logansport was killed. He was one of the Marines that was killed. Sanchez, yeah, Humberto Sanchez. And I couldn't help but thinking, it was very moving actually, I thought, to see the highway lined all the way from Grissom to Logansport with just thousands of people to pay their respects for him, and they should. I mean, that was a young man whose life was cut off way too early.
He was in his 20s, right?
I think 22. But that, without that kind of drama, but that scenario is played over and over and over again every time, and it wouldn't have to just be Afghanistan. Every time a family loses their children in a violent action like war, every time, you know, for better or worse, when a husband goes off, you know, there are always grieving villages, grieving families in that. And I as I said, it just struck me again at how war just doesn't really solve anything that way. It's just, like I said, it just was, to me, heart-wrenching,
Yeah.
and to see that happen with his family.
And if you think of that multiplied over and over again for all the Iraq or people from Afghanistan who've died, you know, family members and parents and children and everybody, aunts and uncles, if that kind of grief happens there as well. And so
It does.
how do we stop that kind of grief making? I mean, it's a machine that makes grief on both sides.
Yes.
Everybody loses. Everybody loses.
So I'm asking you to put on your prognosticator hat.
Okay.
Now that we are officially out of Afghanistan as a country, what do you think a Taliban government, a Taliban-directed culture, what do you think we might see come out of Afghanistan in the next 5 or 10 years?
I think a lot of it depends on whether we relate and how we relate. A lot of the monies of Afghanistan are tied up. We have some of the controls over whether those monies are released. And if we don't release them, things are going to get really bad in Afghanistan. If we would, one of the friends that I was preparing to go to as I was preparing to go to Afghanistan, one of the people I was working with was somebody who'd worked in Afghanistan in the Peace Corps. If we had as many members of the Peace Corps working in Afghanistan as we had military people working in Afghanistan, would there have been any differences? You know, they were working in education, they were working in healthcare, they were working in agriculture, they were working in business kinds of things. Well, that's the kind of thing that Afghanistan needs. Afghanistan doesn't need wars, doesn't need things blown up and people killed and infrastructure destroyed. That's what war does. I mean, it does it very effectively. But Afghanistan doesn't need that.
Right.
But what if we would start to relate to Afghanistan as friends, as partners, as colleagues, as people who, I mean, our world is facing dramatically severe problems. If we would work on those problems together, instead of ignoring those problems, exacerbating those problems, and fighting each other, that doesn't move us anywhere. So what if we would relate to each other in a way that opened up possibilities? I mean, in some ways, war is a way to say which way of living is better. Is the ways that the people in Afghanistan want to live, is it better than the way the people in the United States want to live? And how is it better? In what ways is it better? Or what ways is our system better, or our way of living better? And if you could show it on the ground, people say, well, I kind of like that. I don't think I want to have my women not allowed to go to school. And maybe this Bacha Khan guy that's our ancestor, maybe he had a good idea.
Right.
You know, but we don't prove our worth or the worth of our way of living by destroying everything and by destroying ourselves and killing people. It just, that's no way to
No,
compete.
you're right. Well, I think we're about at the end of our half hour. If I can estimate the technical difficulties we had earlier, I appreciate your time today. And Cliff was in the garden before he came here, and you cleaned up nicely. And I appreciate your time. Earlier, as far as announcements go, I mentioned the Falls Prevention Program, but I forgot to mention Tuesday night at 7 o'clock on Willow Way. If you take Willow Way, it's shaped like a horseshoe. On the far end of the horseshoe, we're having a bonfire with s'mores to mark the International Day of Peace.
Nice.
And especially for people who live in the neighborhood homes, we want to encourage everybody who is interested to come to that. Bring a song, bring a story. People in the manor can come to that. We're not encouraging group participation, and so I'm walking a fine line here of saying that that's where it is on the horseshoe part of Willow Way at 7 o'clock Tuesday night. And then as far as Peace Week goes, we also have on Thursday morning, the Seniors for Peace will be dedicating or rededicating the peace pole that's here outside the chapel. Charles Albert did a nice job of, we had to buy a new pole. It had rotted in the ground, so we had to buy a new post. And Charles Albert cut it and stained it and got the languages back on. And so there'll be a rededication service for that at 10 o'clock Thursday morning, followed by some kind of table discussions out here in the Circle Drive. Again, that is so that neighborhood homes residents can participate as well as manor residents. So that'll be next Thursday at 10. So again, thank you, Cliff, for your I've always appreciated your insights on things like this, and to be honest, a little jealousy that that you can do those kinds of things. But I'm at home here at Timbercrest, so we all have our colleagues, right? And thank you for coming, and thank you for watching, and we'll see you next. Oh, that's the other thing. Next Friday on the Timbercrest Chat will be an interview with Liz Hoffman-Bauer. Liz has lived at Timbercrest for quite a number of years and coordinates our Evensong program and was involved with the Peace Center in Hiroshima, and I think she'll be a good person to talk to as well. So thank you for coming, and Jan, thank you for coming.
Can you repeat who's going to be your guest next Thursday?
The next Friday, Jan asked to repeat, the next Friday's guest on the Timbercrest chat is Liz Hoffman-Bauer, and talk about some of her life experiences. So,
Excellent.
all right.
Well, very
Thank
good
you,
to be
Cliff,
with
and
you all.
I'll go turn the camera off, and you can
Okay.
sit there awkwardly while the camera just looks at you.
And if people have questions, they should feel free to maybe channel through you, Brian.
Sure. That works.
Or comments.
What's that?
If people have comments or questions, they should channel them through Brian, and I can get them and try to respond to them.
Yeah.